Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. I hope you're all having a great day so far. My name is Randy Rafe-Snyder, a partner in Herbine's Management Advisory Services Group. Our firm is very pleased to support this year's Dealmakers Conference. As we all know, these are uncertain times, and it's a period when steady leadership has never been more important. At Herbine, we know a thing or two about remaining steady during these extraordinary and challenging times. For close to 50 years, we've gained experience by living through some of the world's most defining moments. As one of the Mid-Atlantic's leading advisory CPA firms, our strength and stability throughout the pandemic is testament to that resilience. And for clients navigating the post-COVID world, the Herbine Management Advisory Services team brings a strong track record of effective guidance in mergers and acquisitions. Our seasoned and dedicated professionals work closely with dealmakers across the region, providing the technical expertise, tactical skills, and discipline in a wide range of M&A assignments. We combine it with a laser focus on the relationships that are the foundation of every great deal. So it is with that in mind that we're excited to introduce you to this year's keynote speaker, Tim Wallace. Tim is a well-known entrepreneur and investor in this region. He currently serves as a strategic advisor to iPipeline and has more than 30 years of experience in the software, service, and consulting industry. In 2008, Tim joined iPipeline as CEO with the mission of scaling the company and solidifying iPipeline as an industry leader and innovator. Under his successful leadership, the company grew to be the largest provider of SaaS to the life and annuity industry and was acquired in 2019 by Roper Technologies. With this change in ownership, Tim pivoted into a strategic advisor role, guiding the company in future mergers and acquisitions to continue expanding iPipeline's market share and influence on the insurance and financial services industry. Tim previously served as president and COO of MedDecision, Inc., a public software company. Prior to MedDecision, Tim was the CEO and chairman of Full Tilt Solutions, Inc. Full Tilt was recognized by Forrester and Gartner Research as the leading enterprise product information management software in the marketplace. And before joining Full Tilt in 2000, Tim served as CEO of systems integrator Xerox Connect and as the president and CEO for XL Connect Solutions, Inc., where he was also one of the founders of the company. Tim and other members of the management team took the company public in October of 1996. Xerox acquired XL Connect in June of 1998 for approximately $420 million. We are honored to have such an esteemed, experienced entrepreneur and investor sharing his insights with us today. Sitting down with Tim is Dustin Klein, Chief Content Officer of Smart Business. A best-selling author and nationally award-winning journalist, Dustin has interviewed thousands of CEOs, entrepreneurs, business, civic, sports, and military leaders during his 3-decade-long career. Dustin and Tim, the virtual floor is yours.
I'm here with Tim Wallace, strategic advisor at iPipeline and a serial entrepreneur. Tim, thanks for joining us here at the Dealmakers Conference.
Yeah, good morning. I'm glad to be here.
So Tim, let's talk a little bit about entrepreneurship. Let's talk about deal making and talk about how you identify great opportunities. So, you've been part of several successful companies over the years that have had some great growth stories. MedDecision, Full Tilt Solutions, XL Connect, which became Xerox Connect, and then iPipeline. So what has been your strategy for identifying these opportunities in the marketplace for these types of business ventures?
Well, it started right out of Arthur Andersen. I spent my first 11 years there, the last 6 in their consulting group. And then the year that I was going to make partner, around that time frame, my brother and I had started a network integration company. We took it to the Inc. 500. We sold it. I made more money, on that transaction than I did working at Arthur Andersen for 11 years. And I said, I'm in the wrong business. But it was just, a lot of it was timing. When I came into the technology marketplace at the age of, 22, 23 years old, personal computers were just starting, spreadsheets were just starting, Word documents, all that technology was very, very embryonic. But there was this huge market opportunity to reduce IT costs, get off of mainframes, start using information much more from a proactive analytical standpoint to make business decisions. So I was lucky in the fact that I entered the marketplace, back in the early 1990s when technology was really just starting to take off. I mean, Microsoft hadn't even gone public yet. So the first couple companies we took to the Inc. 500 were really network integration companies. We saw the power of the PC. We saw the, power of distributed applications, much more, focused applications that do very specific things like spreadsheets and, Word documents, etc. And then that just, created opportunity after opportunity. Excel Connect really came out of like our third network integration company. By the time that I put Excel Connect together, we became one of the largest network systems integrator in the United States. In fact, between us and INS, we were the top two. Microsoft was actually one of my largest shareholders. They invested about $18.5 million in the company at that time. And we scaled that company from literally 20 people to 2,000 over a 10-year time frame. We opened 26 offices. We did a couple acquisitions. Took it public in 1996. Again, just because the market was hot, but we really focused on the consulting end over that 10-year time frame because the margins on the hardware had deteriorated down to below 10%. Where when I first started selling, fire servers and routers and cabling jobs and stuff like that, we were getting 40% margins. So you had to look at where the opportunities were from that perspective. After I sold Excel Connect to Xerox, I still saw that the software industry was changing dramatically, and that's when I founded Full Tilt with a partner of mine, and we decided to do not only a lot of custom development work for large Fortune 1000 type companies, but we also built what I consider to be one of the best pieces of software I ever was associated with. It was a master data management platform for enterprise-wide companies. There was also very complex enterprise software. And over that 10-year time frame, we had SAP buy one of our competitors. We had IBM buy one of our competitors. Oracle bought one of our competitors. And at that time frame, basically the investors and I basically said, we're not going to monetize this the way we thought. We did end up monetizing. We sold it to QAD. And that became just an opportunity to, make everybody whole and move on. Med Decisions, I was on the board there for 10 years. We took the company public. The CEO, who's a dear friend of mine, was a great visionary CEO, but he was not an operational CEO. So the company ran through their IPA proceeds fairly quickly. And the board asked me to step in and take the company over from an operational standpoint. And I worked with David at the time, and we were either going to raise more money or we were going to sell the company. And lo and behold, their largest customer was the Blue Cross Blue Shield plan of Indianapolis, the largest Blue Shield plan in the United States. It's about a $70 billion company. And we were running mission critical software for them, and they decided that they liked the technology arena and they were going to start investing in it. So they bought us. And we transitioned that company. I transitioned that immediately, and I told them that when we did the transaction. And that's when I hooked up with Mike DiPiano and Roger Hurwitz, and we identified iPipeline. In fact, Mike had been looking at the company for almost 2 years. He called me up one day and he said, Tim, I saw that you left Full Tilt. Would you like to take a look at something for me? And I said, well, I'm running Med Decisions right now, but yeah, I'll take a look at it for you. And I investigated it. I spent about 2 or 3 months doing due diligence on the industry, the product line, the competitive landscape. And I came back to Mike and gave him a report. And I said, Mike, this is an opportunity of a lifetime. This industry is 20 years behind the use of technology. It's very paper intensive. There's very little automation. None of the big guys are even paying attention to it. So you're not going to have to worry about competing with IBM and Oracle and Accenture. And I said, if you're willing to wait till I'm going to leave Med Decisions, I won't be here that long. I would love to invest in this company with you. He said, well, how would you like to be the CEO? I said, well, we can talk about that, but let's start with the premise that I like the space and the company. And that's when I met Larry. So Larry actually called me up and said, hey, I'm the CEO of iPipeline today. The investors want to give us $20 million and take this thing to the next level. I hear you're interested in investing in it. And I went over and I met with Larry and I shared with him a vision of where I could see this company going over the next 10-year time frame. And I said that, there's such a lack of integration and automation of the data. We could own the whole industry. And to make a long story short, that's what we did. We bought the company. We went on to do 11 acquisitions over those years. All those acquisitions were very, very concentric to what we were doing. They were a piece of the puzzle to owning the supply chain. Most of the people we acquired because they were, quite frankly, strategic partners of ours. They liked what we were doing. They liked the vision. And they actually, joined the company. And most of them stayed on to become key executives as we grew over that 11-year time frame. And we took the company from 5 million to over 200 million in revenue. We had about anywhere from 70 to 90% market share on all of our product lines. And we were really the first SaaS platform that put all the pieces of the puzzle together so that a consumer could buy a life insurance policy or an annuity and do that all electronically. When we first got there in 2008, it was like 1% of all transactions were done electronically. The rest were all done on paper. And by the time I left there 2 years ago, the percentage was up to about 65%. Everything was being done electronically. And iPipeline, quite frankly, had the majority market share of that.
What's interesting about that is each one of those was an opportunity for something that was an unrealized, basically untapped market. There was opportunities for growth, opportunities for transformation, and opportunities to disrupt. As you look at things today, do you continue to see that there are those opportunities out there in other areas beyond the ones that beyond the ones you currently see?
Oh, I think there are huge opportunities. I mean, when you look at data, I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg when it comes to using data to do predictive behavioral modeling of not only consumers, but the marketplace, et cetera. I told the people at iPipeline for years that our biggest, unrecognized opportunity was the data analytics because of all this data that we controlled. And over the past 3 years, they've just started to monetize that by showing from an analysis standpoint, what great feedback that they can give to the carriers or the agents or the distributors about where you should sell it, who you should sell to, why would they be buying it at the right points and times. I look at the industry at large and I look at transportation as a service. I really believe in 10 years you will not own a car. You'll summon it, it'll take you where you want to go, and then it'll go service somebody else. Frankly, there won't be drivers, it'll all be robotics. So I look at those two areas are ones that come immediately to mind. But you've got to realize that we as a society have moved to such an instantaneous consumption model, and that's only going to permeate. We want things faster, more efficient, and at our fingertips. I hate to say this, but we're spoiled rotten. But that's going to continue. So as you look out into the marketplace, our whole economy is going to change over the next 30-year time frame. People don't realize this. But when you look at the Fortune 50 or the Fortune 100, and you take the companies that were on that 20 or 30 years ago, there's only 2 or 3 of them left. They're all gone. They've either gone or they've been disintermediated or just not grown to the size that other companies have grown to. So the greatest thing about the United States is the opportunities are here. Society is always changing, and technology is just going to be such a huge part of that. People always worried about, the price of gasoline. And I was like, I'm not worried about it because we got a lot of really smart people like Elon Musk in this country. And now you've got, battery operated cars. And in 10 years, all cars will probably be battery operated. Especially once they figure out in order to, power the batteries, how to do that in a more, cost climate effective fashion. We have to move there. The climate is changing and we as people have to do something about this.
It's an interesting approach of how you're really looking at where the industries are, where they're going. And, that's one of the things that entrepreneurs really have, that unique talent. The other talent that they really bring on board is the ability to identify strategic partnerships. And you've been able to identify strategic partnerships that eventually either acquired a company or became PE partners or allowed you to accelerate growth. How do you evaluate strategic partnerships? And are there any keys or tips that you have for how to really build them?
Yeah, in strategic partnerships, just let me be very, very frank about this. They're hard. Finding ones that are going to work are hard. But once you find them, if you can really, focus on the ones that you not only bring value to, but they bring immense value to you as well, so that the two of you combined together have such a much more significant value proposition, those are really what moves the needle. I can tell you both at, XL Connect and iPipeline, we probably had hundreds of partnerships. I mean, just because of the technology platforms, the integration points, et cetera, but very, very few of them were strategic. At XL Connect, I remember this to this day, I met with Steve Ballmer and Bill Gates, and they had just rolled out Windows NT. And I'm like, guys, this is great, but Novell owns the operating system out there right now, or Unix. How do you think people are going to start using Windows NT when nobody's trained to use it? And the whole precipitous about them putting $18 million into XL Connect was I actually used that money to train the first 200 NT engineers in the United States. Wow. And by the way, they sat there non-billable for about 13 months because nobody was using the technology yet. But when Microsoft then pushed the technology into the enterprise, we were the big benefactor because we had all the trained resources to support the Fortune 100. When I look at iPipeline, we had a tremendous amount of partnerships, but very few of them were actually strategic to us. In that together, us and that partner really drove incremental value into that customer base. So my advice on partnerships is, one, be careful. You're going to have a lot of them. But two, the ones that are really important to you are the ones where you incrementally increase not only your value proposition, but their proposition and the customer's proposition. So it's really a triangle win-win-win all the way around.
You've raised a lot of capital over the years with these different companies. You mentioned Microsoft putting 18 million in, but along the way you had PE partners. You raised different levels of capital, whether it was private equity or other growth types of capital. It's never quite as easy as it seems, nor as hard as it sometimes appears at times based on the industry you're in. What advice do you have for people who are thinking about bringing on board strategic growth capital to help them accelerate the growth of their companies that you learned through these processes?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would tell you that my investors would tell you, it was probably one of my strengths. But at the same point in time, it was one of my strengths because I made it part of my job. I mean, I met with investors day one with every one of my companies, every single week, every single month, all year round, whether or not I was looking to raise money or not. Because by keeping that message clear to that investor community about who you are, where you're going, what your capital requirements might be, when the time comes when you need the money, you've created demand so that you're not going to sit there and waste 6 or 7 more months to raise the money. You're going to raise it in 30 or 45 days because everybody knows the story. At that point in time, they're either all in or they're so interested, you've got them frothing at the mouth. I can tell you, we recapitalized iPipeline 4 times. We bought the company for, pre-money of about 18 million. 2 or 3 years later, I sold it again or recapped it for 170 million. 3 years after that, we recapped it for 385 million. And then 4 years later, we sold it to Ropers for 1.625 billion. The management team never changed. My ownership interest never changed. We just kept bringing in new capital because we needed that capital to accelerate our growth. Even at XL Connect, we raised a lot of money before we went public. We did strategic investments with groups like Microsoft. At Full Tilt, we had Mellon Ventures. We had, an organization, 2 other VCs involved in that deal. So I was always constantly making sure that I had the message to the right people. And again, if you're an entrepreneur and you're starting to hit a radar screen because you are doing the right things, you're growing correctly, these people want to meet with you. Because they have money to deploy, and part of their job is to find the next company that they can make 3, 4, 5, 10x returns for their investors. And we'll probably talk at some point about making sure you pick the right, money, because as I like to say, there's smart money and there's stupid money. And you want the smart money so that help you be successful.
Well, since you brought it up, let's talk about the difference. What do you see as the ability to align yourself with smart money as opposed to just taking what you would call non-smart money.
Yeah, I think, and that's it. That, let me tell you something. That is the hard part, because there are a plethora of options out there, both from, and I differentiate between a private equity group, which I consider to be much, bigger deals where they're starting to write checks of, let's say, $100 million up, in VCs that'll write a check from anywhere on the early stage to 100,000, up to, funding runs that typically could go as high as 100 million. It's really paramount to look at that venture capital firm or that PE firm to see what resources they have, what strengths they have, and what networking capabilities they have, because that's what they're really going to bring to the table. Typically, they may help you on operational issues. They have experts, that they can help bring to the table. But for the most part, they're going to leave you up to running the company. They'll participate at a board level. These guys are primarily financial guys for the most part, although, some of them do and have come out of software companies and can bring more value with sales and marketing strategy, HR, et cetera. But it's really important to assess what they're going to bring to you versus just cash. Because if they're really well known within your industry, there's nothing like, your strategic investor picking up the phone and calling the CEO of New York Life and saying, hey, I got an investment in this company down here. I'd really like you to meet with Tim Wallace at iPipeline because they have this great insurance software, and they can make those types of introductions. Or they can help recruit other executives that you're going to need as you continue to scale that company. I've learned as you scale companies, there are certain executives that are going to scale with you and certain aren't. They're good to a certain size, and then you've got to bring on the next executive. And that's especially true typically in the sales and marketing arena. You've got great sales executives that can get you to 25 million. You probably need a different sales executive to get you 100 million. And at 100 million, you need different sales executives to get you $500 million. So the organization will go through these, migrations as you scale in size, and you've got to bring different people in to help the company be successful and grow.
You mentioned earlier Larry, and I'd love for you to tell a little bit more of a story about Larry, who has been involved in this conference in the past. You talk about management teams. He was there when you got there, and he's there now. So if you can talk a little bit about talk about him first, but then talk about the issue on these management teams and how you assemble and identify the right people.
Yeah, Larry was actually the CEO of iPipeline when the investors brought me in. Larry's a super guy. He was my right-hand man for 11 years. But when I got there, I didn't know. He interviewed me. We talked. He was definitely a big proponent with the VCs about me taking over the company. But when we sat down, when I decided to do this, I said, Larry, I got to tell you something. It typically doesn't work well with the ex-CEO working for the new CEO. In fact, I've never seen it work, but he was insistent upon the fact that this was something he wanted to do. He didn't have an ego. He was going to put that aside. He really thinks that I was the right guy for the job. And to his credit, as well as mine, we both made it work. And quite frankly, we made it work great. His strengths were on the finance and operational side of the business. He's a very good, detailed guy. I was much more sales, marketing, and strategy. So as we used to say, we were a great yin to the yang. And even during our time together, that 11 years, we did 11 acquisitions. And I had come from a background of doing acquisitions before. And, I had actually written a playbook on acquisitions and integrations that I give out to all my friends. I never published it, but I give it away. And we used that. And Larry used to say to me, how do you know that this is going to be successful? And I said, Larry, I can tell you as soon as I walk into a company's lobby, whether or not this is a company I want to buy. And we had several cases where I walked into the lobby and said, Larry, let's go. It wasn't a cultural fit. I didn't feel the energy, the vibe, a lot of things going on. But I'll tell you, I recruited a really strong executive team at iPipeline. In fact, over an 11-year time frame, I only turned over 2 executives. And both of those were on the sales side. As I said, that's the hardest part of any equation, is getting the sales model right. and different executives are good at different scales. So we had one president that helped us get to like 30 million. He was fantastic. But he wanted to stay with companies that were smaller. So he said, Tim, it's time for me to move on. And then I brought the next guy in, and he was fabulous at taking us from 25 to 150 million in revenue. But then he was done. He wanted to go on, to his next entrepreneurial opportunity. Then we brought in somebody that had run, large enterprise software companies. So that's typically the position where I think you're going to morph the most. The other one would be on the product management R&D side. Typically, you don't have a well-seasoned enough CTO or head of R&D that as you scale with more complexity, especially if you're operating in the enterprise, you're going to need to bring in more experienced people as you continue to grow and develop the company. And you always have to stay out there on the bleeding edge. I mean, the life cycle of technology is getting so condensed. And now we're into this whole low-code development platform for the last 5 years where you're doing a lot of pre-development where you're just dragging and dropping stuff. So you also have to make sure that the investments that you recruit, the management team that you recruit, you heavily invested from a training and a development standpoint. I don't care if you're 60 years old, technology is going to change significantly over the next 5 years. And if you don't keep up with it, you'll be outdated. So that's the other thing is you recruit executives, you've got to look for their ability to learn. I am big on the value proposition of loyalty. It's probably my number one hiring criteria. I want to know that if you join my team, you're going to be on that boat rowing as hard as you can with me as fast as we can because we're going to have a lot to be accomplished. I will tell you personally, I won't recruit people that have had 5 jobs in the last 10 years. I have no interest in them because that doesn't demonstrate loyalty to me, commitment, and hard work. That just recognizes they may just not be able to stay interested long enough to provide real value. So I would tell any entrepreneur my number one hiring criteria was always around loyalty.
That's a good piece. You mentioned cultures, like walking through the lobby and realizing that culture is just not going to be a good fit. Post-acquisition integration can be a lot trickier than simply merging 2 companies' operations, its books, and its teams together. You mentioned that culture, and it's one of the things that people fail with. Talk a little bit about what some of the success stories you've had in terms of those post-acquisition integrations, and whether or not there's one that just was an utter disaster for you.
Yeah, I think culture's number one, because if you try to put 2 organizations together that have cultures that are complete opposite or aren't closely aligned, you're going to fail. And it's not anything intentional. It's just because, you're running an organization one way and these people, that isn't the way they do things. So anytime I looked at an acquisition, the number one criteria for me determining whether or not we would go forward was, are they a good cultural fit? And you can tell that by the people's work ethic, how they socialize together, what their focus is, what their HR policies are, what do they do for fun, how do they promote their teamwork? And that was always something that if you talk to people from my pipeline, the number one thing they would tell you is we had an unbelievable culture because, quite frankly, I made it 40% of my job. I know if you have a great culture, you can do anything. There's the old cliche about culture eating strategy for lunch, and I really believe that. I think the other thing that's critically important as you look at post-acquisition integration, you've got to get the people working together. So when we did a lot of our acquisitions, we typically bought a company that had a product that was very closely aligned with ours, integrated with ours, part of our total solution. But typically those people, that's all they worked on was that product. And one of the things that we tried to do immediately was cross-pollinate teams so that they got to know people in other offices, other product lines. They start to see the bigger picture. And we did it that way. But we had 13 offices throughout the world, both Japan, England, the United States, Canada. Keeping that culture together was really paramount, and it required a lot of coordination of programs, events, training, even how you decorated offices had to be similar so that everybody thought, whether you were in Salt Lake City or, quite frankly, Philadelphia, it had the same look, feel, it was all iPipeline. I will tell you the hardest part that you have to realize, and I learned this the hard way, the smaller the acquisition, the higher the risk. So I really didn't like doing acquisitions where there were less than 10 employees and less than 5 million in revenue. Because typically you would be paying money, which would be 2 or 3 times that. So there was 10 or 15 or 20 million dollars on the table. 1 or 2 people typically owned that, and they basically, you just gave them, money that changed their lifestyle, so to speak. And in many cases, put them in a position where they didn't have to work anymore. And if it was a small company and they left, it could be disastrous. So one of the things that I really, brought, having learned this before I got the iPipeline, and Larry and I had a lot of conversations about this. I said, Larry, if there's sub 5 million in revenue or sub 10 people, it's just too hard to make it work. Let's let them build critical mass. Let's stay close to them, and when they get to that threshold where we know we can absorb the company, the technology, the people with minimal risk, that's when it makes sense.
A lot of folks here at the conference this year are looking at what do they do with their business next. We're trying to figure out how do we get out of a pandemic. You mentioned culture, and we've got opportunities where people are working remotely from across the U.S. I just had somebody send me today a job description for a national company, and they had no location on it for the first time ever.
Right.
How do you think that can impact a company's culture, and what tips do you have with when you had multiple offices everywhere for people who are not all in the same room? Yeah,
it's funny because typically you either come down on the left side or the right side about working at home. You have a group of people that love working at home and they never want to come back to an office. You've got another group of people that want to get back to the office as fast as they can because they miss the social interaction, the teamwork, etc. And then you got, which probably going forward is the hybrid model where you're going to allow both, but you are going to, require, some time in the office because you got to keep the culture. You got to, and most importantly, it's the social interaction, it's the creativity, it's the innovation that comes out of that face-to-face exchange that you just can't get on a Zoom call. I'm sorry, you just can't. It's just really, really hard. You need people in a room throwing around ideas, letting the stuff stick to the wall, beating it up again, redigesting it, taking another look at it from 4 different angles. Somebody new walks into the room and says, "Oh, did you think about that?" And that's the biggest challenge, I think, going forward, is how do you incorporate that into that hybrid model? How do you keep that? The biggest thing that I saw when everything went remote was a complete breakdown, for the most part, in projects that were being done by third parties for a corporation. Because all of a sudden, all the corporate members went remote. All of a sudden, the consulting company or software company, they all went remote. And that interaction, just even though it was electronic, was much, much more difficult. And I watched it not only at iPipeline, but other companies that I sit on the board of. You just saw service levels deteriorate until everybody kind of got used to how do we communicate now? How are we going to do this effectively? But as we go forward, there's a tremendous opportunity with this hybrid model to continue the creativity and the innovation. And I would counsel any CEO that, with the hybrid model right now, you have to think about, how do I keep that creativity? How do I keep the innovation? How do I keep the teamwork going and run your on-site time with employees that focus on those key critical issues? Don't worry about the finances, the financial statements, the balance sheet, the modeling and stuff like that. Figure out how you're going to continue to push your company forward to keep them out there, leading the industry, making your customer value proposition as high as possible. And that's, I think, the number one job a CEO is going to have going forward.
As you look at what's next for you, doing as a strategic advisor for iPipeline, you seem like the kind of person that gets an itch that needs to be scratched around building and creating businesses or moving companies forward. What do you see as your next role?
Well, you know, I've probably had 50 CEO job offers or job inquiries since I sold the iPipeline. Um, you know, over the years, you know, people don't know this, but I probably put 10 million miles on an airplane. Traveled extensively with XL Connect. We had 26 offices. You know, iPipeline, we had 12 or 13 worldwide. So, you know, Europe a couple times a year, Japan a couple times a year, plus our domestic offices. I made sure I always visited as well as our customers. So I decided, you know, after a long run and doing, you know, fairly well personally, that I did not want another CEO role. It was time, and for the sake of my lovely wife and our great family, it was time for me to reprioritize some of those things. But my wife would tell you, for me, supposedly being semi-retired, I work as much now as I ever did, because I'm just that kind of guy. I like keeping busy. I like mentally keeping my intellect stimulated. I did start another company, you know, 2 years ago. I'm the chairman of it. It's a data analytic company. As I told you, I'm big on data. And we recently, you know, just launched that technology platform. It's all about helping, you know, retailers do more effective customer acquisition. And the 12 retailers we've brought on board, that's doing really well. I sit on a couple boards. I do a lot of mentoring in the local marketplace for other CEOs. And I think I'll probably just in the future continue to, you know, as I say, putz around, helping, you know, the next generation, you know, become successful. I get a lot of satisfaction out of that. You know, I don't want to, you know, step in and be the CEO of a company. I've, you know, had that 7 or 8 times now. And it's just time to give a little bit back and, you know, enjoy life a little more than I have.
Well, Larry, we appreciate what you're doing out there. I'm sure the folks here in Philadelphia really appreciate having you in part of this community. So thank you so much for sitting down with us here at the Dealmakers Conference and talking about entrepreneurship and M&A.
It's been awesome. And for all the entrepreneurs out there, best of luck to you.
Thank you, Tim and Dustin. Tim, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today. I think we're all going to walk away with pages of ideas and advice to use in our own deal making. Ladies and gentlemen, we now invite you to spend the next 20 to 30 minutes either networking in one of our video network rooms or checking out our midday Dealmakers conversation, a mini roundtable, growing a 4th-generation family business featuring Jane Millard, Executive Chairman, and Kathleen Shanahan, CEO of Turtle & Hughes. Then, starting at 1 p.m., we will move to our afternoon sessions. We invite and encourage you to visit the Agenda tab and add the sessions you'd like to attend to your My Agenda. On behalf of Herbine, I invite you to enjoy the remainder of today's conference. We will see you later this afternoon.